Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Chapter 16. Remember, we're doing the survey of life. The survey of life is we're going to start with the least complex organisms and make our way up to the most complex organisms. We just finished talking about the two least complex domains. Those two domains are domain bacteria and domain archaea. The third domain of life contains all the rest of living things. If it's not a bacterium, if it's not an archaea, it is a eukaryote. Within domain eukarya, there are four kingdoms. The four kingdoms are Kingdom Animalia, animals, Kingdom Plantae, plants, Kingdom Fungi, fungi, and Kingdom Protista. Now, protists are protists because they don't fit anywhere else. Kingdom Protista was created for organisms that were too complicated to not be classified with the bacteria, but not complicated enough to be classified with plant animals or fungi. That artificial grouping worked well enough. It wasn't great. It's okay. Kingdom Protista holds the misfits. Kingdom Protista is the junk drawer of the biological world. It contains the things that simply just don't fit anywhere else. To be honest, to be totally honest, Kingdom Protista doesn't really exist anymore. The reason why is because as science has developed, as scientific techniques have gotten better, we have studied them deeper and decided, you know what? These things actually don't really belong together. They shouldn't be grouped together, and so we're going to give them their own kingdom. So Kingdom Protista doesn't really exist anymore. Kingdom Protista is actually several separate kingdoms within domain eukarya. However, I'm old. And because I'm old, I'm not going to learn all these new kingdoms. I'm not going to make you learn them either. So we're going to leave them grouped together in this thing that we call Kingdom Protista. Protists are, for the most part, are unicellular. Not all of them, but most of them are unicellular. It means just one cell. As I said, the kingdom itself isn't actually just one kingdom. It's multiple kingdoms. Lots of people have... Well, let me start over. The people that really care about protists have had these kingdoms created. And only the people that study protists know what the kingdoms are, because nobody else cares. But Kingdom Protista are eukaryotes that aren't plants, aren't animal, and aren't fungi. Because they're almost but not quite. We will still talk about them in those groups, meaning we'll talk about the ones that are closest to plants first, and then we'll talk about the ones that are closest to animals next, and then we'll talk about the ones that are closest to fungi. Please understand, these groupings they make sense, but they're not exactly terribly accurate, but we're going to keep that strategy, that is the old strategy of discussing protists, and we're going to retain that old strategy because it's simply just the easiest. Our first group of protists are the algae. Algae are photosynthetic. So if they're photosynthetic, they have to be most like plants. The algae are most like plants. They're all Autotrophs, and they live in anywhere there's water. And it doesn't even have to be liquid water. It can be ice. Anywhere there's water, we're going to find algae. They use chlorophyll as their photosynthetic pigment, though they use a variety of chlorophylls. Some will use the same chlorophyll plants do, chlorophyll A and B. Some don't. Some use other chlorophylls, like C, D. Some don't use B, but they use at least A. Our first group of algae are the Dinoflagellates. Dino means to whirl. Flagellum means to whip. So dinoflagellate means whirling whip. Dinoflagellates create a test out of cellulose. Let's pause and talk about that idea for just a minute. You would call a test a shell. It's not a shell because a shell opens. A snail shell will open, the snail comes out. A clam shell will open, where the clam can, well, it doesn't come out, but it can extend bits of it out. A test is not a shell, but you would imagine, you would call it a shell. So dinoflagellates create a test out of cellulose that have flagellum on them, and the flagellum are found in a groove that go around the waist, the center section of the shell. And it causes, when these flagella spin, it causes the thing to whirl around in a circle, hence the name whirling whip. Some species of dinoflagellates are responsible for what we call red tide. I'm not sure if you can see very well in this picture. This is a tide with a bunch of red streaks in it. Red tide is when, generally what happens is a big storm will dump a lot of rain on land. That rain will wash over, generally, farm acres, and it washes over cropland. It picks up all the fertilizer that has been sprayed on the farmland, and then this big wad, this big glut of fertilizer is then dumped into the ocean. Well, these are photoautotrophs. They're similar to plants, so they need the same resources plants need. And so when they get this big glut of fertilizer, they have this big bloom, and they do really good. Like, yay, let's, reproduce. And they reproduce in great amounts. And then because they don't live very long, because they've used up all the resources now, they die. And once they die, they begin to decompose, and when they decompose, they turn red. And this is where red tide comes from, is the dead bodies of all these dinoflagellates that reproduced and did great because there was lots of resources to do so, and then died. You may have heard that you shouldn't eat oysters after a red tide. Well, because as they're decomposing, they're releasing toxins, and oysters are filter feeders. They suck water in, they pull anything that's floating in that water out and eat it. Well, dead bodies of microorganisms are one of the things they pull out. And so these toxins can build up, and oyster, you get sick. Our next algae are chrysophytes. P-H-Y-T-E, phyte, means plant. Chryso means gold or yellow. So chrysophytes are golden algae. These are diatoms. Do yourself a favor and put into Google diatom, and then click images, and look at the picture of diatoms. They are truly beautiful. Diatoms also make a test. It depends on the species as to what they make it out of, but they can make it out of silica, which is related to glass. They make a shell like glass. All different kinds of shapes. All amazing different shapes that these microorganisms make. Diatoms. They are truly beautiful. Do yourself a favor and look at some Google images of diatoms. Next are euglenophytes. I love the name. I love what it means. It means true eyeball plant. True eyeball plant. Euglenophytes are actually pretty cool. Euglenophytes are mixotrophs. A mixotroph, troph, remember, means to feed. Mix means mixed up. Euglenophytes are able to live heterotrophically or autotrophically. Because they're an algae, they have to photosynthesize. So as long as there's enough light, they'll hang out at the surface of the water and they'll photosynthesize. If there's not enough light, they will go hunting. They will swim down and look for other stuff to eat. And they will phagocytize stuff and eat it up. So again, they don't really fit. Is it a plant? Is it an animal? Plants make their own food. Animals eat other stuff. And what do these things do? Both. They are a mixotroph. Mixotroph. They can live heterotrophically in darkness, and they can photosynthesize in light. The true eyeball means that they're actually able to detect light. And when they do detect light, they go ahead and they swim towards it, which is actually kind of unusual. Most small things that can detect light don't go towards it. They go away from it. And the reason why is if there's light, they can be seen. If they can be seen, they can be eaten. Euglenophilites are odd in that they want to go towards light. But again, they want to go towards light because, well, for them, it's free food.